Hey there, how's it going?
Hi, Benji. All good here.
Nice.
Today has been not quite as hot as yesterday.
Agreed.
Yeah. My usual workplace is under a roof, so I can definitely feel the heat when it's there.
I bet. I'm very thankful for my fans.
Oh, that's nice.
Could do with some aircon though.
Okay. Hi guys. I have to set up my audio.
Hey, Michael.
Hi.
No, not this one. Too many cameras. Okay, still waiting on. Okay.
Yeah, we should be 6 or 7 people, something like that, right?
6, yeah.
Six. Yeah, there is.
I'm hoping that
for
Morris saw the reschedule.
Okay. Why did we reschedule in the first place? Was because of.
Because oh yeah, he's not put himself in the list. David couldn't make it.
Yeah, I saw it. Okay, he's missing out. Yes.
Yeah, I think it will be very valuable to have David here. He has given some really good feedback.
Agreed.
Hello.
Hey, Dennis.
Hello.
What's up?
Hello.
I think I may have made a mistake. I thought that Gabriel had thumbs up the change of meeting time, but it doesn't seem that he did.
Oh, David is asking how to join.
Does he have a
Okay.
link to the schedule? Can you drop him just a link to the schedule and you should?
I think.
Hey, there you are. We are hoping another couple will join, but in the meantime, I guess I can kick us off. Let me load up the agenda. Okay, cool. So as we all know, we've all agreed to the spec membership agreement, the participation and contribution guidelines, and the code of conduct, links to which are in the meeting notes in the agenda. Take a moment to introduce ourselves. So I think we maybe all know each other here, but let's introduce ourselves anyway. I'll start. If we go in the order in the agenda, I'm Benji, I'm from GraphQL.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dennis, and yeah, I maintain GraphQL, WS, and SSC, the server side, and the WebSocket protocols.
Hi, everyone. I'm Benedict. I do stuff with GraphQL and PHP.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm working for Chilcream, and we are doing the .NET kernel implementation.
Hi, I'm David. I work at Apollo and do a bunch of things there, but mostly I am maintainer of Apollo Server, which wraps GraphQL.js. My first time here, I may have to leave a little early, and I may need to eat during this. I apologize for both of those.
Sure thing. David, if you can send a pull request to the agenda to add yourself, that would be great. Thank you. Okay. Again, it would be ideal to have someone taking notes. I did just update the link to the notes in the agenda just now because I accidentally linked to the June one previously. So please do contribute notes there if you can. That would be ideal. So for the agenda today, we've got looking at the previous meeting's action items, which has been allocated 5 minutes, but I suspect we're going to spend more like 10 to 15 on it. Then there is looking at the remaining steps for advancing the spec. And then Benedict is going to talk about the plan for the test suite. Is there anything else that people think should be on the agenda?
One thing is that I'm a little short on time towards the end of the meeting. So if we could pull my point forwards, that would be great.
Yeah, that's fine. But I'm also aware that David is short on time as well. So we need to make sure that he also has time to have input. But yes, let's do that. Okay, cool. So let's quickly go over the action items. I think all of them are ready to be closed. So if you have a look at the ready for review action items, I'm going to go through them in numerical order. So one of them is number 11, which is ancient, how to tell if the server implements the spec. Lee suggested that there should be a way to tell that a server implements the spec, and that maybe that could be via the options HTTP verb. I think this is a good idea, but I'm not sure that we need it for version 1. I think just having support for this new media type that we've defined should be sufficient, and that most clients and servers should move towards using that. So if that is used, then you know it implements the spec. I think that would be sufficient for now. How do the rest of you feel?
The problem is, if we don't have an indicator how to that the spec is implemented, how do you move towards new media types? I mean, you send your idea is to send an initial request and see if it works out.
Yeah, you send it with an accept that includes the new media type, and if your response includes it, then you know it's good.
Okay. I still find, but the problem is if we go down the road of this options request, there are other things that need to be considered. Then, like do we send down a version of the spec and things like that? And yeah, I see the problem.
Yeah, that's why I figured we should avoid speccing the options for now, because there's so much that we might want it to do, and I don't think we need any of that for version 1. I think all we need to know is, do you support this effectively the new media type? That's the main thing. And we can do that just with the accept header. So I don't think we need to do anything specific.
Okay, I agree.
Is there any dissent? I'm going to close this one for now. We'll probably want to come back to it in future for the options request, but for now, I'm going to close it. Next action item was number 31, talking about opening this as an official media type, actually submitting it. We found that we don't really need to do that. We can in the future, but for now, I suggest that we don't worry about it, in which case I think this action item that was raised 3 years ago is complete in as much as it is an action item. We could reopen it as just a regular issue, but action item wise, I think it's done. Any dissent? Cool. I'm going to go ahead and close that as well. And 191, incorporate David's feedback into the spec. Well, I have done so. You happy with it, David? Yep. Excellent. I'm going to go ahead.
Yeah, my only other thing is, considering whether we want to take a stronger stance about the sort of CSRF prevention side of things, but that, I think that had its own thing somewhere.
I think that will be separate. Yes. Very good. Excellent. 192, Dennis is here, so I'm going to close that. Check the SpecMD is working. I've hooked up SpecMD. It is now working, and there is a spec URL that you can use. So I'm going to close that. And Gabriel, unfortunately, isn't here, but he did go through all of the issues and close the ones that he didn't feel were relevant. I've reviewed those as well, and I'm broadly in agreement. So I think that is fine. That action is complete. 195. The issue labels have been copied over, hence why these issues now have the action item and ready for review tags. So I think that is all good and done. Thank you, Gabriel, again. And here is the meeting that we've scheduled. We are in it, so that one is done as well. All right, that's all the action items. Before we move on, there is also 2 pending pull requests. Gabriel has reviewed and approved these. I think you, Benedict, have also, you've reviewed them. I'm not sure if you approved them, but I think that we should merge those.
I didn't formally approve, but I'm not against merging.
Okay. Unless there's any hesitation to merging those 2 pull requests, which are numbers 197 and 200. I'll go ahead and merge those now. I'll give you a minute to just glance over them.
Can also merge the agenda pull request.
Yeah, I'll do that now.
Split in the point.
Okay, so splitting the example into 3 different examples, I think, is the more simple pull request. So how do people feel about that? I know Benedict has suggested that we add an additional note, but I think we can merge it and then add the note afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Let's do that. Squash and merge. Great. And then the other one was a little bit more subtle because it's actually adding all of the notes. So if anyone wants to say, oh, I'll review this after the call, that's fine. Otherwise, if everyone's happy, we can merge it now.
Let me go over it afterwards because I
Yeah.
haven't read this one.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. I think that's it for the action items. So let's move on. I've lost my link to the agenda, so here we go again. Okay, Benedict, if I hand over to you and you talk about the test suite.
Sure. So there has been an attempt to do a test suite. There have been a couple of ideas floating around on how to do it. Some have suggested it should be something like GraphQL Playground that you can run in the browser and use it to point towards the server and just check manually if it implements the spec. I tend towards preferring a CLI-based tool that can be run automatically. That way we could maybe we could do a GitHub action or some simplified way in order for implementers to be able to verify that they actually implement the spec. So, and I don't think we need to solve every issue at once. So both options are fine, but to start off, what option do you think would be best or most important?
The browser-based solution won't be capable of testing every possible thing that you might want to test because browsers are limited. Then you have issues, cores and various other things. So though I think everything that you might positively want to test is testable through a browser client, because the whole point is to be compatible with browsers, the negative tests I think would be more challenging to do. So I would recommend that we just go with a regular CLI or similar approach that doesn't have the limitations that a browser has.
Yeah, makes sense to me. I mean, if it's possible to have a common core that works both in browsers and somewhere else, that's great. But I don't think it's necessary for the first implementation.
Yeah. Also, I mean, the test suite could also be something like a work in progress. We can always add things. Like it really doesn't have to cover all the cases, and this should not be a blocker.
I think this certainly is not a blocker to us releasing the spec. The GraphQL spec itself doesn't have a test suite. The reference implementation does, of course, but that's fine. So yeah, I think we can go ahead and release the spec without it, though it would be a very nice companion. Did you have anything else to ask about that, Benedict, or are you happy?
I'm just looking for the issue where we discussed it in the first place.
It was Jaden, I think, who was originally working on it.
Yes, and we also had an issue open about it. Right, found it. So in the past, I've researched a little bit about which library or which tech stack would be appropriate. I figured it's probably best to write it in JavaScript, since that's what the reference implementation uses, and that also enables us to move towards the browser at a later point. In terms of libraries or tools one might use, we have Jest has been thrown around as a basic test runner. Not sure if it's actually appropriate though to do this kind of external testing of external code. And also, do you possibly have some suggestions for a good library that we can use to make the HTTP requests? Something that's geared towards.
There is Apollo did a small test suite for their federation stuff. I just remember that because we implemented it, and then we were able just to do a pull request with the project in a certain structure, and then they run their tests against that. Might be worth looking at that, because it was quite nice to have that in that way.
Is that in a repository somewhere?
It's in the Apollo. I can throw something.
David says he'll dig up a link.
Yeah, there's yes, exactly.
I think if possible, it would be ideal if this could be done without using any libraries. Effectively, it's just doing HTTP requests, right? And it's just effectively looping over a bunch of tests. So I think Node itself is capable of doing all that stuff without a huge amount of additional boilerplate. If we can achieve it with just effectively one JavaScript file, and you can just have the JavaScript file and the Node.js runtime or similar, then it will make it a lot easier for people to run that tests against, the Java or .NET or C or whatever else, Swift, that we've got going on. So that would be my vote, is to use as few dependencies as possible. Obviously, we can bundle up whatever we use anyway, but I would try and keep it really, really lean if possible.
But if you look at it, it's quite nice. They have like now Federation 1, Federation 2, and then each of the implementations, and you can see how far each implementation is along in implementing that spec.
Oh, right. I just remembered, yeah, I have implemented this one.
Yeah, it was quite from an implementation standpoint, that was really easy to do.
How would offering the test suite work? So I guess it could be part of the repository GraphQL-over-HTTP, but would we want to have something like where the implementers add pull requests to the repository and then have tests run against the things all the time? Or would we just want to publish the test tool and say, here's the test tool, do whatever you want with it?
I think for the same reason that the GraphQL reference implementation and the GraphQL spec are in separate repositories, the spec and the test tool should be in separate repositories, mostly because I don't think it needs to necessarily be the same set of people maintaining both. The spec text can be ahead of the test suite, and that is fine. And the test suite people can be, doing very easy merges to, update dependencies and things like that. Whereas with the spec, much like with the GraphQL spec, the bar to getting your pull request landed will be much higher. So I think separating them out would make sense.
Right, so it would be a separate repository under the GraphQL organization then.
David, did you still have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to, maybe this is neither here nor there. I'm saying I'm really specifically excited about this testing thing existing specifically for once incremental delivery gets into the spec as non-RFC, because I feel like by 2022, people probably mostly have implemented like the very basic stuff that we have spec'd now correctly. But I suspect that like being able to have a nice test suite for incremental delivery is going to actually help a lot of people. Like, oops, you forgot to actually do content encoding chunks or, something like that.
Very good point. Benedict, do you think you have enough information now to proceed with anything that you need to do?
Yeah, sure. So I think we said that after we discussed this, we could close the issue about the test suite.
Okay. Yeah.
I probably won't get to it in the next few weeks, but I reckon I might look into implementing something.
Yeah, in essence, it's just us defining schema that everybody needs to implement, or and then we can write tests for the schema that cause certain errors and stuff like that.
I would probably do it so that so for some things we would need to have a schema in order to test certain kinds of errors. But for other things, we could just use introspection. So there could be like multiple levels to how deep you want to test. And if you don't have a server that implements this test schema, you could just run the basic introspection test suite and have that work on every server.
Yeah, but it's like as soon as we go into things like incremental delivery with deferred stream, I know it's not in the first spec, but it's something that will come, and then you need to test with the schema.
Sure.
In theory, you could defer part of an introspection query itself, although who knows if that would actually get deferred in practice.
Yeah, but a good optimized server could skip the defer. Would be allowed to say, okay, because that is the sync result, we don't defer. I just give you the result.
Agreed. Yes.
Yeah, but running the test suite could be parameterized, and you could specify to which extent you would like testing to happen. And if you just test a server that only has introspection available, then you just run a part of the test suite. Of course, then you can't say you are fully compatible, but it's better than nothing.
Yeah, but yeah, it depends. Yeah.
One note is, speaking of being fully compatible, is I hope that the test suite is able to differentiate between the musts and the shoulds. Like, I think it should test everything in the spec, but you should be able to say, like, you know, we are 100% compatible because we implement all the musts, or we are even more compatible if we also do all the shoulds.
Yeah, in the initial approach, we recognized that, like with orange, green, and reds, Jaden had worked out a couple of things there. I remember that we had this. So if you didn't implement the should, it's like orange, but it doesn't fail or something like that.
Okay, great. Should we move on to the rest of the topic, which is basically getting the schema ready for the spec ready for release? Excellent. So here we are, ideally drawing up a plan. Last time we released the GraphQL spec, it was in October. And the aim is to do it annually. So hopefully we'll be cutting a new release of the GraphQL spec in October. It would be ideal to try and tie the release of the GraphQL-over-HTTP spec into that same release cycle. In order to do so, there is some legal work that needs to be done. We need to track down all of the contributors and make sure that the CLAs have been signed and all that kind of stuff. That is one of the reasons why getting the previous version of the GraphQL spec released took so long. Just took a long time to track all those people down. But that is not something that we will be doing at the working group. That's something that the GraphQL Foundation or the TSC and so on will be taking care of, I believe, which at least takes it off of 3 of our plates. So what we need to think about is what actually do we need to present to the GraphQL working group in order to advance this. At the moment, we have a roadmap, and the roadmap says that we are in stage 0, which is like I forget what they called it, not pre-release, roadmap. Preliminary. So it's currently called preliminary, and then stage 1 would be proposal, stage 2 would be draft. So stage 2 is basically like, it's basically good to go. We just need someone to put that final rubber stamp on it. Stage 1 is, we think it's pretty good, but you know, there might be a few more changes that need to be made. I think we are pretty much in the position where we should be able to advance it to stage 1. And I think we can do that under our own steam. When it comes to stage 2, I'm not 100% sure whether it should be us advancing that to stage 2 or whether it should be the GraphQL spec working group proper. I suspect the latter. So what I would like is to be able to present a version of this to the GraphQL spec working group and say, hey, can you put the stage 2 draft stamp on this? So my questions are, what do you think we need to do to get it to stage 1? And what do you think we need to do to get it to be ready to present to the GraphQL working group in order for them to push it to stage 2?
I think I think we need to have implementations for that. So we need to try it out, at least 2 implementations, one non-JavaScript, one JavaScript. Is the same process that we do in the proper GraphQL spec group, like testing that it works out. So we should get 2 implementations there. And the second thing, we all should read it again. I also think it's the same, like the next step we could take. But at least for the next step, I would also feel better if we had one implementation that said, I implemented everything of this and it works out. So we need one implementation. I can do one for like .NET, which is almost the same like Java. So there will not be a lot of differences like in concepts. But there must be at least one JavaScript implementation.
So by an implementation, what exactly do you mean? So because we have GraphQL servers right now serving GraphQL over HTTP. So does that mean like we check some implementations and then we basically...
No, what I say is we need to implement this specification as it is today in its written form, like the latest changes that we have. We need to implement this specification. Like I, for instance, implemented a part of this, not the newest version, I would need to go over it. But this documentation text that we have here, if we want to move that along the stages, we need to make sure that it works out, is implemented. It doesn't need to be released, but that we have it. It's the same like we do with GraphQL.js. We implement it, it can be in a branch, but it works out. Often when you implement a spec text, you see this or that, and then can fill in feedback. The feedback could be, it's perfect, let's move on.
So my hope is that the, for example, Express GraphQL should already implement the basics, the musts of this spec in its current form. We need to go through and validate that for sure. But are you suggesting that we should have these implementations that implement all of the shoulds as well?
Yes, because that is a real new stuff, and that's actually what I mean. So we need 2 implementations that really have all of this implemented. So essentially, like what becomes must also in the cutoff date that you would define.
Does Express GraphQL implement it yet? Because that's kind of the minimalist implementation, right?
Not the shoulds. I don't think it's officially supports the new media type as far as I know, but honestly, I haven't looked.
That seems
we
like
also don't.
Apollo server doesn't do the new media type yet. We're a little busy with AS4, but we'll, I definitely plan to do it. We will not be implementing some of the shoulds. Like we're not going to change application JSON, like parse and validate errors to be 200s. Just for I still think we're gonna make that change, but we'll help us encourage people to use the new media type, of course.
I'd be happy to tackle the JavaScript TypeScript implementation of HTTP server. So I actually acquired a cool name, which is actually GraphQL-HTTP, which is perfect for the GraphQL-over-HTTP group. And since it doesn't exist, I can just follow along the newest and the latest from the protocol and have a brand new implementation that supports all the shoulds and all the musts.
One big advantage of doing that would be that you would notice any omissions that we have. So if you try and build that only following the spec, I think that would be a very valuable exercise.
Yeah, that's the idea I have. So I already started playing around with it, but I really didn't go along. But my idea is to literally follow the spec, and yeah, if something falls out of the scope, we can coerce it somehow.
I do think there is power to having the implementations that you get to say, hey, this exists, therefore it's a real spec, be like, real implementations with users. So I do feel like Express GraphQL, I mean, my understanding is Express GraphQL basically in the same way that GraphQL.js is kind of like the reference implementation of GraphQL execution, that Express GraphQL is roughly the GraphQL.org's foundations, reference implementation for being doing web stuff. So it would seem like that would, and that it actually has users. So it seems like that might be more valuable than building a new thing from scratch that won't have users. Not to say that it isn't fun to build new things.
And also one thing that I'd like to add, since if I were to tackle this implementation, it would of course have to have a test suite, which is something that could be somehow plucked out and be used further on for having a CLI or hopefully a browser environment that can do at least the basic tests that browsers should support. So
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, because that, especially when you're just looking at validating if an existing implementation already implements the spec, and then at that point, maybe you're doing some HTTP requests per hand. At that point, you might just as well write the test suite for it.
Yeah, and then the tests would be structured as such so that it actually does the HTTP request. It doesn't do any mocking. It would start the server and do the requests. And then if you want to test another one, you would just swap out the endpoint actually.
Yeah, I might do
Awesome.
this validation for GraphQL PHP, which it can be used as a standalone GraphQL library, but also has something called standard server. And I think a standard server should implement the spec.
Sounds good. That would be 3 implementations.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Okay, great. So implementations is one thing that we should do. Are we going to suggest that we should have these implementations in place before we present it to the working group? Because I figure we'll present it to the working group and then they're going to have to spend some time reading it. I did suggest that people have a read of it at the last working group, but I'm not sure if anyone will have done so, because I did also say we're still putting in some of the final edits. So I would like to get to the point where basically all of the edits are in place in the next, week, so that we can say, here is what we would like to advance, and we are currently getting those reference implementations in place, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so like moving it to the next stage 1, I don't mind, because we can still do edits. These edits that we have open with notes, I don't think that's a blocker for that. But moving it to draft stage is a different thing that we should have validated it before that. But that doesn't prevent us from presenting it to the overall group, because we could say, okay, that's a milestone. We are implementing that now and validating the implementations. But we are inviting now everybody to take part in that and give feedback, because there could still be a couple of things where Lee doesn't think it's good, or somebody else thinks it's not good, and which could introduce theoretically a major change. I don't think so, but it could be. So let's present it. Let's move it to the next stage and present it to the group.
Sounds good. The other option would be to present it to the GraphQL working group and try and get the advance to stage 1 there. But I think we can just advance it to stage 1 ourselves. And I think we're relatively confident that that's okay to do.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Shall we officially now move it to stage 1, or should we wait for those notes to be merged?
Yes, move it.
Okay. The spec is now stage 1. Well done, everyone.
Awesome.
Cool. So some of you are going to be building the implementations. I will see if I can get in touch with Ivan and see if Ivan is willing to make some changes to Express GraphQL. Otherwise, hopefully someone else will. We will present the current form, hopefully with the notes and any other, like I know Benedict wanted to follow up with another note as well. Any of those merged. If we can aim to get those all merged well before the next GraphQL spec working group, like not literally hours before, ideally, then I would be happy to present it there again. Do we think there is any major omissions or major issues in the spec as we see it at the moment that would prevent it from being released in October?
Let's see after we implement it.
I would like a, sorry. I would like to think. I would like us to think pretty seriously about whether or not we can make the spec require, or at least strongly encourage, things that protect users from CSRF, because that is a pretty serious problem we ran into, and especially around basically requiring a content type to be fast instead of just sort of recommending it. We have basically found that is the most useful way to ensure that people can't just run mutations with your cookies from random websites.
You mean require that the content type is the new content type, or require that there is a content type?
Essentially, finding a way to prevent at least mutations from executing via HTTP, via Core's simple requests, the kind of requests that can be sent by a random website without any without a pre-flight. Like basically any server that allows non-pre-flight. No, so post, yeah, so almost, that's the problem. The difference between pre-flight and not is not get versus post, but it's whether or not, roughly, it's whether or not like interesting headers are set. So the thing that saves you from CSRF problems over post is not the fact that it is post, but the fact that you probably had to pass content type application JSON. Yeah, so I mean, we can go into this at a better time. Maybe next meeting I can like do a presentation on this or something, or we can bring it up on an issue or something. But yeah, we in Apollo Server are very, very strongly requiring that you should not execute any operations via anything that could have come via essentially a non-pre-flight request, especially not mutations. And as part of that, by the way, we have found that the GraphQL upload specification as written without any extra guards is basically incredibly insecure and should never be used without extra guards in place.
But there is like a must, or there's a must. A server must support post request encoded with the application JSON media type, as indicated with the content type.
Right, but it can support other media types, and that's the issue. If the server chooses to support the form URL encoded.
Sorry, it's not. That's not my concern is, well, it's several things, but mostly if a client does not supply a content type header with the post request, the server should reject it, and that not being a must is actually a big problem, because there's actually browsers will treat a request without a content type and a request with a content type that is application JSON or like anything other than text plain, multi-part mixed, and one other, like very differently security wise. And so by requiring there to be a content type application JSON, it actually makes things safer. And by allowing people to just like send some JSON without a content type header, it makes things worse. And it's a should right now, not a must.
But there is as well, like a client must indicate the media type in the content type header.
But then 2 lines later, but then 2 lines later, you say that if it doesn't, it should reject it, not that it must reject it. Unless the next line, it should be interpreted as the server must reject it and should reject it with a 4xx.
The client does not.
If that's the intention, it wasn't clear to me, but I can see that.
No, the intention was to allow existing curl scripts to still be spec compliant, or to still not to be spec compliant, sorry, but to run against spec compliant servers. So if you have a curl script that doesn't set its content type, or I think content type is required now, but doesn't set an accept header, then that's fine, and the server should still be able to deal with that.
I'm not concerned about the thing about said, it's about the content type, and my statement is we should actually design our specs so that that is not a valid GraphQL thing, because it really opens up your servers to some pretty severe attacks.
We also reject that. So if there's no content type, we reject the request in our implementation. But that I also think that is a must. I mean, I commented also on the content type, but as I read it, it is a must. But we can we should make a strong statement that if there is no content type at all, then it must be an error.
This might actually just be a clarity of text thing, and maybe it's like it possibly just needs to be reworded as if it does not supply it, the server must reject the request and should use the appropriate 4XX code. Is maybe what it's intending to say, and I was misinterpreting it due to a slight ambiguity. I can just file a PR for that, honestly.
I wrote it, so no, you're not misinterpreting it. It was intended to be a should, but I certainly understand your argument for a must.
Yeah.
I'm trying to weigh it up with the intention for the should, because we have to keep in mind that it's not just web clients that use HTTP, it's also mobile clients, it's also command line apps, it's a whole bunch of stuff, other servers. And what I don't want to do is make it so that you have to do this behavior in order to be spec compliant, but by being spec compliant, you now have broken all of your existing clients.
But there is an
are there clients? Is it? This is probably going outside the time that we have today, but maybe we can talk about this at a future one. I actually have to run. But I think it is worth having a real discussion about this before the final spec publication.
But I think it's probably okay to change this to a must, because honestly, if you send a blob of data to the server via post and you don't say what type of thing it is, I think the server should reject it anyway. And I don't think that should ever have been allowed. So I'm okay with changing this to a must.
Yeah, because if we encode now something into spec and we know that this is not that this has security implications, we shouldn't do it. Yeah, so this can be worded stronger, and then I think it's okay. Oh, Benji.
David, did David have to go?
He's gonna wait.
That's fine. I'd like David to raise that pull request if possible, just changing it to a must, and also adding a note below it to explain why. That would be ideal. But yeah, I'm cool with that change. Gabriel.
But it is still, and it's still like, I read it anyway as a must, because we say it must indicate a content type, not which, but it must have a content type.
The issue, I believe, wasn't that it must contain a content type. It's what the server should do if it's not there, and it's only a should there. So those two are just out of sync.
Yeah, but what does a must mean? You must provide it, and then if you don't, I mean, if that is a must, that you must provide it, then it follows out of this that otherwise it's an error. I mean that.
Right.
I agree, but there's a spec compliant client and a spec compliant server, and if the client is compliant, then the server works fine. But if the client is not compliant, the server should still work correctly, and that's where the server should.
Okay, I see. Yeah, I overread. I interpreted it. Yeah, we should align then. Yeah, but David will raise an issue on that.
Yeah, that well expressed there, Gabriel. That's exactly the intent. But yeah, I think we should be changing it to a must. Gabriel, I'm so sorry about the scheduling. I counted the number of thumbs up and assumed it included you and forgot that it included me. So
But
was
it actually
off
worked
by a
out
while.
better because I got back from the backpacking trip a little bit late, and so that's why I was late here. Even this is perfect.
Okay, that's fortunate. So just to catch you up real quickly, we've closed all the action items. Thank you for your work on those. We have merged a few pull requests. There's another one going in. We've just agreed to advance the spec to stage 1. And we are planning to present it to the working group, the next working group. We have agreed to implement, or for there to be 2 implementations of this spec. Ideally, we'd like to present this version to the working group that's coming up in August. And then hopefully the month after, if we've got those implementations in place by then, we can then say, we would like to stamp the stage 2 stamp on it, please, and get the GraphQL spec working groups okay to do so. And that should put us very much in alignment for heading towards an October release if we can. That would be ideal. So what we're talking about at the moment is what is left to do. What do we need to cover in here? David's just left, but David is very much of the opinion that we should put some more strong stuff in there with regard to, I think it was cross-site request forgery that he had in mind. So we discussed one of the issues there, which was around the content type, which you came in on the end of that conversation. If you're aware of anything that currently, is missing or is badly specified in the spec, it would be good to know about that so we can deal with it ASAP, preferably before we present it at the August spec working group.
Let me look back over and remind myself of it because I've been in the wilderness. I can look at that and create issues or pull requests by this weekend, I think.
That would be amazing. Yeah. I actually think that we're pretty much done with the discussion now. It seems like we're in a pretty good place. I know at least Michael's going to be reviewing the notes pull request. Benedict, who's just had to leave, is going to hopefully raise a note in a pull request. Hopefully David is also going to change one of the shoulds to a must and add a note in a pull request. If we can get all of those merged in the next week or so, that would be ideal. And then, yeah, it should be good to start presenting it to the working group proper.
Perfect.
Does anyone have anything else they'd like to discuss this meeting?
Pretty happy about the state.
Yeah, I've been really happy that Benji, thank you so much for bringing life back into this group and pushing the spec forward. I'm looking forward to this getting in for official status.
He's hoping. But yeah, thank you. Cool. Well, in which case, it's been lovely to see you all again. And I guess if we aim to organize another working group for around this time next month, that would be great. And hopefully it will just be a case of reporting on the implementation status and things like that.
Yeah, that would be so awesome. You said you were hoping for 2 implementations. I'm assuming Apollo and what else?
So hopefully it's GraphQL Express because it should already be compliant with the musts, I think. So it's just a case of adding support for the shoulds. Dennis has said that he would like to build a GraphQL-HTTP module in JavaScript. And that would be purely implemented based on the spec. So one of the great things about that is it would mean
a peer reference.
Exactly.
Sorry, go ahead, Benji.
he'll spot any of the like omissions in the spec, things that we haven't said about, and things like that. So that'd be great. Also, I think Michael's going to be implementing it in Hot Chocolate. Benedict in GraphQL PHP, hopefully. Did I miss one?
No, that's
it that we've agreed. So if we can get two of those done by a month and a half's time, that would be amazing. We'd be in a really good state then.
I really think, Dennis, not to put any pressure on you for the time or anything, but I really like the idea of having a reference implementation that's official, that goes, along with GraphQL.js, that could be part of the working group's kind of like a package to further make this official, for lack of a better word. To have the spec and a reference implementation, I think, is always good.
Yeah, I think so too. And yeah, I'll put myself into gear and hopefully release it in time, actually. And also the idea that I had behind it is that it will be a both client and server side implementation. So it will be server that's completely in line with the spec, and also client using it. So yeah, thumbs up for that. I mean, fingers crossed for that.
Yeah, well, both thumbs up too.
Both.
Yeah, and if you need help, feel free to reach out to me.
Lovely, thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. If there's nothing else, then I guess we can draw this meeting to a close.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a nice one. Bye-bye.
Bye.